The Chantry teaches us that it is the hubris of men which brought the darkspawn into this world. The mages sought to usurp heaven, and in so doing, they destroyed it. So spoke Duncan, Warden Commander in the Kingdom of Ferelden, in the 30th year of the Dragon Age, on the dawn of the 5th Blight. Throughout the history of Thedas, 5 times have the darkspawn poured out of their subterranean breeding grounds, each time with a massive, draconic archdemon at their head, each time bringing devastation to the realm. In this video, we will explore the origin of Thedas' most wicked and brutal natural phenomenon, and the events of the First Blight, the longest and most devastating war in Thedosian history. 395 years before the founding of the Chantry, when the Tevinter Imperium was still the mightiest empire in the land, Coryphaeus the Conductor, High Priest of Demat, the Dragon of Silence, began receiving visions. According to the Canticle of Silence, an apocryphal verse in the Chantry's liturgy, Demat spoke thus to Coryphaeus: "Open the gates, to my golden city you must sojourn. At the foot of my throne I shall anoint you, most favoured of my disciples, and I shall raise you up to godhood, that all mortals shall know your glory." Coryphaeus became obsessed with achieving these visions, yet bypassing the veil that divided the waking and spiritual realms, let alone reaching the seat of the gods, would take an unfathomable amount of raw magical force. So it was that Coryphaeus went to his esteemed peer, a mage known simply as the Architect, High Priest of Euthemiel, the Dragon of Beauty. Upon being asked to aid Coryphaeus in ascending to the heavens, the Architect conferred with Euthemiel in his dreams. Euthemiel responded in kind with a vision, commanding the Architect to aid Coryphaeus in helping man ascend to the heavens, not to the end of helping Coryphaeus become a god, but so Euthemiel could make his chosen servant a god in Coryphaeus' stead. Thus, the Architect agreed to help the Conductor in this vainest of projects. However, even between the two of them, they had not the power or resources to force open a physical passage into the Fade. To that end, they recruited 5 other High Priests of the 5 other dragons, the Watchman of Lusican, the Forge-Wright of Toth, the Appraiser of Andoral, the Augur of Razikale, and the Madman of Zazikel. Each one of these mighty magisters had received a vision from their gods, telling them to help Coryphaeus enter heaven, and that when the time came, it would be they, and not any of their peers, who achieved apotheosis. Thus, with the magisters all agreeing to work together, while secretly planning to betray each other, mankind embarked on his quest to usurp heaven. In the following months, the 7 High Priests, now known as the Magisters Sidereal, began labouring in preparation to enter the Golden City. The cost would be enormous: 2/3 of all of the lyrium in the entire empire, alongside the lives of thousands of slaves, mostly elves, whose lifeblood was spilt to fuel the Magisters' spells. These macabre efforts bore fruit, for the lyrium and the blood sacrifices caused the veil to rip open, creating a passage for the Magisters to enter the spirit world in the flesh, and in so doing, they doomed the world. So it is written in the Canticle of Threnodies: "And so is the Golden City blackened with each step you take in my hall. Marvel at perfection, for it is fleeting. You have brought sin to heaven, and doom upon all the world." In the modern Dragon Age, no 2 legends or faiths can agree what happened when the haughty High Priests stepped foot into the Golden City. The Chantry teaches that the Maker instead greeted the Magisters, the Chantry's one true god, who cast the Magisters out of heaven and cast the old gods out of the Fade, sealing the primordial draconic beings in prisons deep beneath the earth in the physical realm. Other sources, however, claim that when the Magisters entered into the City of the Gods, it was a black shadow, its throne laying empty. Either way, the Magisters were forced to return to the physical world, not as gods but as corrupted ghouls, for their time in the realm of gods had tainted their hearts and their bodies, making them into a new type of twisted being, the first darkspawn. Upon their return, any mortals who beheld the newly blighted form of the Magisters would themselves become darkspawn, and thus a new wicked race was introduced to the land. Although the darkspawn are inherently vicious beings, they are usually too disorganized to be an existential threat. That is, until they awaken an archdemon. Deep in their subterranean prison, the old gods sing a slumbering song, beckoning the darkspawn unto them. Whenever the darkspawn uncover one of the old gods, their presence both awakens and taints the ancient dragon, turning it into an archdemon. This blighted divinity then assumes control of all darkspawn, turning them into a single horde, capable of threatening all civilization on Thedas. The first old god to be transformed into an archdemon was Dumat, and upon his awakening, the first Blight began. Although the coming cataclysm was devastating to all races and tribes, it was the dwarves who were hit by far the hardest. Having built their vast empire deep beneath the earth, it was in their realm in which the darkspawn first emerged. Moreover, the first Blight could not have come at a worse time for dwarf kind. Although they were, in theory, a unified empire, united under a high king in Kal Sharok, in practice, each of the great Northern Thaigs ran their own affairs, and often bickered with one another in feuds that could last generations. Moreover, Dwarven society was deeply stratified, divided into castes, with those being born into the upper and middle castes, like warriors, smiths, and miners, having inherently more rights and privileges than those born into the lower servant castes, or worse yet, the casteless, who were not even considered people. As such, when the Blight came upon Thedas' grand underground empire, Dwarven society was caught gridlocked amidst never-ending internecine bickering and a bitter social class struggle. Before long, the darkspawn horde emerged onto the deep roads. Soon, the vast underground highways which had connected the Great Thaigs across thousands of miles became infested, as darkspawn swarmed out into them like venom through a body's arteries. The dwarves, divided and distracted, were caught completely by surprise, and at the onset completely failed to organize a unified defensive line. Nearly overnight, countless cities were razed by the caustic horde, and the majority of the Dwarves' history and cultural achievements were lost forever. Eventually, the leaders of the stout race united under a single king, a Dukan, under whose leadership the dwarves finally managed to stem the darkspawn advance. However, this came at a massive cost. 4 huge swaths of the deep roads had to be blocked off, and countless more Thaigs abandoned to their fate in order to ensure the survival of the 4 largest Dwarven cities, Gundar, Hormak, Kal Sharok, and Orzammar. A beacon of hope for the dwarves came when one of their most brilliant minds, Karadin, discovered the secret to forging golems, huge automatons of steel or stone, which were both near indestructible in battle and immune to being infected by darkspawn taint. These golems became the backbone of the Dwarven army, and even allowed them to retake lost Thaigs and stretches of the deep roads which had previously been given up for lost. However, these victories came, once again, at a bitter cost, for the creation of a golem required the soul of a living dwarf to be sacrificed and woven into its steel-clad body. At first, many dwarves volunteered for this, sacrificing themselves so that they might become an instrument of war to save their race. Yet before long, the volunteer pool dried up, but the darkspawn threat remained dire. To compensate for this, Dwarven kings began forcefully putting criminals, the casteless, and political dissidents into golem bodies. When Karadin objected to this, he was himself forcibly turned into a golem. However, unlike other golems, he retained his autonomy of free will. To put a stop to the involuntary harvesting of Dwarven souls, Karadin reclaimed the Anvil of the Void, the lyrium-infused device which was used to create golems, and vanished with it deep into the blighted deep roads. Now deprived of the ability to make more steel juggernauts, the advances the dwarves had made on the darkspawn were turned back around. With near complete control of the deep roads, the darkspawn horde controlled a crucial infrastructural network that they could use to surface almost anywhere at any time. Thus, when the Blight came upon the world of men, it did so nearly everywhere at once, leaving the armies of the Tevinter Imperium scrambling in their attempts to create a solid defensive front. Wherever the darkspawn struck, the land around was sucked of moisture, blackening the earth and turning plants to dust. The skies filled with rolling black clouds that blocked the sun. Disease and rot followed, Huge swathes of territory became unlivable, and no matter how many darkspawn were struck down, there were always more to take their place. During their raiding and pillaging, the darkspawn would often take human, dwarf and elf women captive, bringing them to their underground nests and forcing them to undergo a horrific process that transformed them into twisted, bloated beings, known as brood mothers, which were capable of birthing new darkspawn in the thousands. Different brood mothers produced different kinds of darkspawn, which resembled the race it had once been. Dwarven brood mothers spawned genlocks, human brood mothers spawned hurlocks, elven brood mothers spawned shrieks. Most terrifying of all, brood mothers who had once belonged to a mysterious race of horned giants, known as the Kossith, spawned massive, brutish shock troopers, known as ogres. If all this was not bad enough, the archdemon Demat would show himself on the field on more than one occasion. A deadly draconic force to be reckoned with, Demat was capable of slaying thousands, and even when he was slain by brave warriors, which happened on more than one occasion, he would immediately revive, his spirit simply possessing the nearest living darkspawn, which promptly transformed back into a massive blighted worm when infused with the archdemon's soul. Indeed, it seemed as if the horde was unending, and its leader unkillable. For over a century, the Blight continued, and entire generations lived and died knowing only violence and pestilence in their lives. Barbarian tribes on the fringes of thedas, like the Alamari, Rivini and Syrian, were overrun, while in the Tevinter Imperium, the fabric of society unraveled. The imperial masses, who for generations had worshipped the seven old gods, were thrown into a crisis of faith when faced with the fact that the Blight was being led by their own sacred dragon Demat, while the other six, when offered gifts and prayers for salvation, responded only with silence. In a cathartic fury, the citizens of the Empire lashed out against the religious leaders who had failed them, forming mobs that burned down temples to the old gods and strung up their priests. Truly, it was the darkest of times. And yet it was when the hour was bleakest that the world was given a glimmer of hope. 305 years before the founding of the Chantry, a special order of warriors was founded in the mountains of the Underfells, in the fortress of Weishaupt. They were the Grey Wardens, and would bring salvation to the land. Unlike the rest of Thedas' institutions, the Grey Wardens cared not for their members' race or faith, taking on dwarves, elves, and humans alike. Each member underwent a special ritual, known as the Joining, in which they ingested the toxic blood of the darkspawn. This was an extremely dangerous process that killed most of its participants. Those who survived emerged enhanced, possessed of a deep connection with the darkspawn, able to sense when they were near, and able to hear the call of the archdemon, thus giving them an immense advantage in battle against the horde. Riding atop massive griffins, the Grey Wardens took to the field and found great success over the horde. Crushing victories over the darkspawn in places like Nordbotten created a much-needed boost in morale across Thedas, rallying Tevinter magisters and barbarian chieftains alike behind the Warden's cause. Yet the Blight continued, for the Wardens had yet to make the ultimate sacrifice. As previously mentioned, if an average person strikes the killing blow on an archdemon, its spirit is released and travels to the nearest soulless darkspawn. The only one capable of permanently killing an archdemon is a Grey Warden. When a Warden strikes the death blow, the archdemon's spirit still passes to the nearest tainted creature, but that creature is the Warden. Since the Warden has a soul, the attempt by the archdemon to possess the Warden fails, destroying both souls in the process. 203 years before the founding of the Chantry, a grand coalition of human forces, consisting of the remaining armies of the Tevinter Imperium and the barbarian tribes of the Syrian and Rivini, joined with a stalwart legion of dwarves and faced down the archdemon Demat and his endless hordes at the Battle of the Silent Plains. It was one of the bloodiest days in Thedosian history, with over a third of the allied forces cut down. Yet it was all worth it, for in the carnage, a fateful Grey Warden, whose name has been lost to time, got in close enough to Demat to strike a fatal blow upon him, joining his soul to the archdemon and destroying it forever. Deprived of their leader, the the darkspawn horde was figuratively decapitated, and they fled back underground in droves. The first Blight was over. As the darkspawn retreated back into the bowels of the earth from whence they came, much of Thedas rejoiced. Yet for many, victory over the Blight, which had terrorized them for generations, was a bitter draught. One Blight had been defeated, but there were 6 remaining draconic old gods imprisoned deep beneath the earth, meaning future generations would have 6 more Blights to contend with. For the dwarves, the first Blight never truly ended. Although without an archdemon to guide them, the darkspawn did not terrorize the humans of the surface world, they still infested the subterranean deep roads and thaigs which they had taken from the Dorva, using them as staging grounds to bore deeper into the earth in search of archdemons to awaken. While the world above enjoyed peace, the war below raged on. Before long, the thaigs of Gundar and Hormak had fallen, leaving the cities of Kalsharok and Orzammar as the only bastions of Dwarven civilization left on Thedas. As for the Grey Wardens, whose order had saved Thedas, their reward was a slow and excruciating death. Tainted with darkspawn blood, each warden only had some 20 or 30 years to live. After that, their tainted blood would begin to corrupt their bodies, transforming them into a subservient ghoul like any other in the Horde. Knowing this to be their fate, the Wardens developed a ritual known as the Calling, in which when their time came, they would venture into the darkspawn-infested deep roads and slay as many monsters as they could before being overwhelmed and killed, a preferable alternative to transforming into the very creatures their order was born to slay. In the aftermath of the First Blight, the Tevinter Imperium was deeply shaken. Once the most powerful nation in Thedas, it was now a palace built on a foundation of sand. Their gods turned against them, the hubris of their magisters responsible for the unfathomable destruction, and their armies weakened by the Blight said magisters had unleashed. It was in this environment that a humble woman, a slave, would claim to be the bride of the one true god, and lead a holy rebellion that would liberate the long-suffering elves and barbarian tribes, bring the empire to its knees, and ensure that henceforth magic would serve mankind, rather than mankind be slaves to mages. In our next episode on the history of Thedas, we will cover Andraste's rebellion, so if you don't want to miss it, make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing, this goes a long way to help us in the eyes of the almighty algorithm. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to see what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. Your feedback is very important to us. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.